the fruit, the root, and the remedy of sin. So as we talk about sin, first of all, let us talk about what sin actually is. What is it when we say sin? That's a word that we can hear a whole lot. We don't hear it nearly as much as we used to. We don't hear it nearly as much as we need to. But what does it mean to sin? Well, according to the Keetch Baptist catechism, sin is any want of conformity or transgression of the law of God. Sin is this. Sin is any want of conformity or transgression of the law of God. In other words, what that's saying here is that sin is any time that you are desiring to break God's law, and that any time that you break the law of God. God is the Lord of the universe. He is the creator of it. He is king. He has established his law. He has given his law for us. This is in the Ten Commandments. The law of God reflects the nature of God, the character of God. Why are you to have no gods before God? Because there is none higher than God. God is the highest of all beings. And so to worship anything other than God is to reject reality. So that law, you shall have no gods before God, is reflected from the character of God because he is the highest of all. There is none greater than God. So you are not to worship anything more than God. Likewise, you are to not lie. That is the 9th commandment. You shall not lie. Why is that a commandment? Because God is truth. He is the source of truth. All truth is God's truth. And so when you lie, you are rejecting the character of God. So anytime that we sin, we are violating God's law. To think about it in another way, sin is an archery term. What it literally means is to miss the mark. So remember, in archery, or perhaps we could say even riflery nowadays, right? You're aiming at a target, and the target has a bullseye. If you miss the bullseye, you've sinned. You've missed the mark. You were aiming for the bullseye. You shot at the bullseye, but you missed it. You sinned. What is our mark? Our mark is the glory of God. God declares in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, you shall be holy as your Father in heaven is holy. Remember when we've talked about this before, how God is holy? Holy reflects this sense of what? Of separation and moral purity and perfection. The standard is God's moral perfection. You don't have to be as powerful as God. That's not the standard. You don't have to be as knowledgeable as God, but you are to be called to be as morally perfect as God. And we miss that standard. We do not reach that standard of moral perfection. And so we sin. This is not how humanity was created. When Adam was created, he had that moral perfection. He was sinless. It was an unstable state in that he could lose that state of sinless perfection. And in fact, he did. When he ate of the forbidden fruit, that was the original sin. He broke God's law. Well, up until that point, he had been keeping God's law. He had been an obedient servant. He had been holy as God is holy. But when he ate of the forbidden fruit, he sinned. And because he sinned, that sin was now passed on to everybody who came from Adam, meaning every single person born of normal means is now infected with sin. And so what sin again is that any time we desire to break God's law, not just in temptation, right? There's a difference between being tempted, but the actual desire within us, which is a little bit different from temptation, and when we actually transgress the law of God. Jesus explains this in his heart when he talks about, on the Sermon on the Mount, where he says that it is written that you shall not commit adultery. So if you commit adultery, you've transgressed the law of God. But he says, but surely I say unto you that whoever lusts after a woman in his heart, there's that desire element. It's not just a sense of being tempted, but you are lusting after another woman in your heart, that you've already broken the law. So sin is not only breaking the law, actually going out and committing adultery, but that lusting after a woman, that desire to break the law, when you've decided in your heart, given the opportunity, I will break God's law, that also, you've now broken God's law in your heart. And so this is what sin is.